Gilbert says he was shocked when he saw the Vice News interview making its rounds on social media, where Reinell admits to shooting and killing 39-year-old Aaron J. Danielson last Saturday during a pro-Trump caravan that was met by counter-protesters in downtown Portland. This video from a Twitter user shows Reinell among those counter-protesters. Take a look as we slow the clip down and zoom in.
Everybody's got a right to do what they want to do if it's peaceful.
Oxford town, everybody's got their heads bowed down. Sun don't shine above the ground, ain't going down Oxford town.
Fortunately, it hasn't been peaceful, but you can't walk up because somebody's got a Patriot prayer hat or a Trump hat or whatever and shoot him in the chest. It's wrong.
It felt like the beginning of a war.
It was a huge scoop, an exclusive interview with the Antifa activist wanted for shooting a pro-Trump supporter in Portland 6 days ago. But just hours after the promo aired, Michael Reinell was killed in a shootout with U.S. Marshals.
The U.S. Marshal Service said he had a gun and threatened officers. That's when they opened fire. Evidence markers suggest 28 shots or more were fired. What is not clear yet is if Reinell fired any of those shots.
The affidavit includes this surveillance photo, which shows Reinell inside a parking garage earlier Saturday night as the victim, Jay Danielson, walks by. Reinell can then be seen following them. A friend of Danielson says a man with Reinell was the aggressor and threatened to kill them. He also spoke to the Common Sense Conservative YouTube channel.
So they identified our hats. We've got a couple of them right here. We've got a couple of them right here. Pull it out, pull it out. And
is that what they said?
That's what they said. We turned around. It didn't even register that somebody was pointing a gun at us until the shots went off and took off running.
This all happened as a car rally in support of President Trump was wrapping up. A gun was found on Danielson after his death, but police say it wasn't used in the encounter.
The U.S. Attorney General's office released a statement Friday saying local authorities had an arrest warrant for the suspect who had fled Portland. He was tracked to Lacey, Washington by a fugitive task force led by U.S. Marshals and the FBI.
See Oxford town in the afternoon, everybody singing a soulful tune. 2 men died by the Mississippi moon, somebody had to investigate soon.
If you grew up left-wing, as I did myself, you grew up in a subculture that glorifies violence. That may seem a little strange at first, because the left wing is remembered for opposing the Vietnam War. But if you stop and let yourself reflect on it honestly, especially if you're a member of my generation, what you'll realize is that the left wing was never opposed to nuclear weapons. They were never opposed to war in any of these theaters. What they were opposed to was the United States winning. And they supported the Soviet Union in every war that they thought the Soviet Union could win, and they supported the Soviet Union in all of its victories. So what you're looking at in the distinction between left and right in the whole of the 20th century is not the distinction between the pro-peace and pro-war factions in American politics or Western European politics. You're just looking at two different sides of one and the same war, the Cold War. And as I say, I grew up with left-wing parents, and I grew up literally seeing buttons and posters that opposed nuclear weapons. Like many members of my generation, I had a creeping realization, really during my childhood, before I reached my teenage years, that the people I knew, including members of my family, the people I knew who went to these peace protests, they weren't protesting for peace, they weren't protesting against the war, they weren't even opposed to nuclear weapons. They just wanted the other side to win. They were just protesting in support of Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, their heroes, men who by that time already had died of old age, but whose faces were still very much on the dollar bills, if you will, of China and the Soviet Union. Their statues were still towering over the city squares, the capitals of Russia and China, respectively. But the importance of this concept of the revolution. Outsiders just can't quite imagine. I mean, certainly, there are moderate Democrats and Republicans for whom the word revolution has some kind of haughty, inspirational quality. I get it. But I don't think you can imagine what it's like growing up in a left-wing family where people will interrupt you and shut you down, where you're trying to discuss the difference between solar power and nuclear power generation and making the transition or trying to cope with climate change, and they will shut you down in mid-sentence to say, no, nothing can change, nothing can be improved without the revolution. What does that mean? What does it mean to grow up with that mentality? Nothing can be improved. There's no point exerting your mind, your energies to analysis, research, and learning about the fine distinctions between solar power and nuclear power generation. There's no point trying to figure out how to ameliorate or improve, say, the situation of African Americans in the suburbs of some city in Michigan. No. What real intellectuals do, what the vanguard does, is start making revolution here and now. They take advantage of, they exacerbate the fissures within capital society. They live with the conviction, not only that nothing can be improved, but that it would be counterproductive. It would actually be bad for the revolution to make improvements that would allow bourgeois capitalist society to last longer. Instead, what the real intellectuals of the left wing do is start making revolution here and now. And real left-wingers have lots of examples of countries that never achieved the preconditions that were set out piously by Karl Marx and Engels. So don't you know about Albania? Don't you know about the success of the Albanian revolution? All that you need is a moment of violence, is for men with long guns in the streets to tear down the government and set up a communist. Don't you know what happened in the French revolutions, plural? Don't you know? All it takes is violence. Increasingly with time, I mean, again, over time, I'm going from being 6 years old to 8 years old to 10 years old. What you realize is that it's not that there's some sort of philosophy that's uncovered the necessity of the revolution. Rather, what they believe in is the revolution, is violence by any other names. And then they will make up any philosophy to justify that violence, that revolution. It wasn't in my own family only that I encountered this mentality again and again and again. How can anyone care about reforming the banking system or the tax system or dealing with corruption or looking seriously at deforestation or power generation? Don't you know the problem is the system? Don't you know the problem is capitalism, and that the only solution or any possible solution is going to start, not finish, with revolution? Therefore, start directing your attention towards revolutionary violence here and now. You see what this does to the development of a young man? The very people who present themselves as the most refined, erudite, highly educated, even scientifically enlightened thinkers of the left are in fact the new barbarians. They're the people for whom the solution to every problem is violence, and the whole purpose of political thinking is just the justification of, propounding of, and recruiting people in for joining in that self-same revolutionary violence. The vast majority of the violence we've seen on the streets in the year 2020 is inspired by nothing more and nothing less than greed. And I suppose we should find that reassuring. There were a whole lot of people out there who just wanted a new pair of blue jeans or a new video game system, and they went out and they robbed and they looted Target and so on and so forth. So the main motivation has been greed. Another massive motivation is the fundamentally passive and anti-revolutionary attitude that the government should solve the problem. and that therefore the role of the public, even if they're literally burning down a Wendy's or smashing the windows of a car repair shop, the role of the public is just to complain loudly enough and demand loudly enough for the government to solve this problem for them. Again, there's something reassuring in this, in that these people aren't revolutionaries. They're profoundly conformist. They still just want the government to solve their problems. As ridiculous as it may sound, there is something fundamentally lazy in their rioting. They're not trying to tear down the regime and replace it with something better. They don't have a manifesto. They don't have a new constitution. They don't even have reforms they're proposing in the Constitution. They just are trying to use violence in the streets as part of the culture of complaint, with the assumption that the government sits there in loco parentis. The government is going to sit there like a mature parent that once the tantrum is over will attend to the needs of the child. But there is this fragment of the revolutionary left that's active in the street violence, that's pulling triggers, that's killing people in small numbers, here, there, and everywhere. And they're on the internet recruiting. Because the only thing they believe in is the inevitability of this revolution and the instrumentality of violence as the exclusive means to making progress towards the ends they desire. They know they'll never command a majority of voters. They know their views will never be popular. They know they can't win in public debates. So they've gotten on the road of conspiracy to try to organize all of the guns and knives they can. And the year 2020 provides them with a kind of opportunity. An opportunity to see if they can test their luck, if they can act out some part of this fantasy that many of them will have been raised with from early childhood, as I was myself. I just wasn't stupid enough to believe in the religion of my forefathers. I was born and raised a communist, but I was able to grow beyond it, to come to sneer and laugh at everything my parents taught me to believe.